Hi, Monica Miller here, Legal Director and Senior Counsel for the American Humanist Association, and this series is Legal Tuesdays, where I answer your questions about separation of church and state. The question I have lined up today comes from our online complaint form, and they ask, how much of this is a cultural issue? There are multiple examples of countries that have no legal separation of church and state, yet in practice are more secular and have less religious influence than in the US. So here are my thoughts on this. It's a good observation, and it's one that a former professor of mine / good friend now, and someone I work with now and then, Phil Zuckerman, has written about. He's a sociologist and teaches at Pitzer College. I don't know why I almost said university. I went to Pitzer College. I guess maybe when I'm thinking of someone that does like a study or something, because I was going to say Phil has done studies on the church-state separation in different contexts and in other countries that don't have it, looking at their education and general well-being to see if they're better off than, say, our country. But this is one of those areas where correlation does not equal causation. One issue that makes our country more polarizing and religiously divisive isn't because we have separation of church and state. It's because of separation of church and state that we actually have a diverse country. We have a country we're a free country, and we have liberties that other countries have not had. And so in those countries, when folks are forced to leave because of religious persecution, they have come typically to countries like ours because we do have church-state separation. And as a result, we see a lot more friction. The more diverse views that are abound, the more there is room for controversy or conflict. And that is precisely why the government can't put its hands on the scales in favoring one faith over another or religion over non-religion, because now the stakes are higher. We have a lot more diversity in our country than we did back when our forefathers came and drafted the First Amendment. In fact, there is a good quote that I put in our latest appellate court brief involving the appellate court brief involves a Florida police prayer vigil, but the quote itself involves or pertains to legislative prayer and the issue of whether they were going to continue to have paid chaplains deliver prayer in Congress, the first Congress. And I think it was John Adams who had said something to the effect of, it was one of the Adams was the final vote, and Jefferson was against it. I think Washington was against these prayers. I might be getting this a little bit botched, but the bottom line was something to the effect of like, I'm no bigot. I can hear prayers that are not of my faith. But back then it was really just different. For the most part, it was different iterations of Christianity all the way over to like deism / atheism. I believe that Jefferson was an atheist, and I think many others agree, just based off of the history and evidence that we have that he was an atheist. For instance, like telling I think it was his nephew in a letter to question the existence of God. There was a newspaper article around the time of the elections, and it was vote for Adams, who is pious, or vote for Jefferson and no God. So it was known even at the time that Jefferson was not a theistic, pious, Christian, Bible-thumping believer. But I digress. The bottom line here is that while there's absolutely a social issue at play, it's not the social issue at play is as a result, I think, of church-state separation, but not as a fault of it. It reaffirms that we need to have church-state separation because other folks have fled from countries that didn't have it. And the example of the countries that do have that seem better off, despite not having a First Amendment, those tend to be countries, at least in Phil's research, I think this pans out too. But I'm not a sociologist, so don't hold me to any of this. I can only speak to legal things, but this question jumped out at me, perhaps because I am familiar with Phil's work. I think those countries are less diverse overall, religiously. And for that reason, I think there's less friction. But there's other factors at play, education and, education period is a huge one. And I think a lot of the problems with religion in our country stem from folks that are not educated. There's a lot of homeschooling in the middle of the country. There's a lot of preference for theistic texts. So we can't really blame, these new populations of people who are they're not even having the same access to education as other parts of the country. And the information that they're getting is just patently false a lot. So, those are my thoughts. These are non-legal opinions on this episode, but my thoughts, and I will see you on the next episode of Legal Tuesdays.